What's going on, guys? This is the Red Rogue, and I hope you're all doing well today. Well, the new year has arrived, and we're back in the patch 9.2 PTR. Hopefully not for too long, but until this all hits live servers, I'll be poking around and seeing what new features and goodies await us. For today's episode, we'll be looking at something I don't think I've ever covered on the channel in any meaningful capacity: optional reagents for crafted gear. Now, crafting in Shadowlands is a bit different than it has been in prior expansions, with things like stat missives allowing crafters to choose the secondary stats on the gear, and crafters' marks increasing the item level of gear as well. Please keep in mind this is all PTR footage, so the exact source for these new recipes is not confirmed yet in-game, and you're just buying them on a test vendor to see how they work. Oftentimes these sorts of recipes are locked behind reputations and whatever, so I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case for these ones as well. Anyways, once again, we'll be seeing a new level of Crafter's Marks, bringing us up to rank 4, which gives your rare quality Shadowlands crafted gear a boost to item level 233. This will be a pretty low item level in regards to the amount of gear that we'll be seeing in patch 9.2, but it'll be really handy for fresh alts or to fill in missing pieces more easily. There will also be a new unique Crafter's Mark, the Mark of the First Ones. This will let you craft an item level 262 piece, but it will be given a unique equipped item property, meaning only one crafted piece of the First Ones can be worn at any given time. No doubt there'll be a pretty steep reputation requirement or some other carrot on a stick for crafters to chase after, but this will likely be profitable for quite a while. Now, item level increases are cool and whatnot, but they're also entirely expected whenever a new patch comes out. For patch 9.2 Eternity's End, we'll also be getting new Progenitor Enhancements. These are another optional reagent when crafting armor, and it can only be used on rare quality armor, like the Shadow Lace armor for cloth wearers. In Blizzard's infinite wisdom and them totally not just, forgetting leatherworking exists or whatever, I ended up having to make my character a tailor so I could test these Progenitor Enhancement armor effects, because the crafting vendor on the PTR has literally none of the stuff you need to level or craft stuff for leatherworking, so that's fun. There are 8 Progenitor Enhancements that can be made by players, split among Alchemy, Enchanting, Engineering, and Jewelcrafting. Each of these enhancements has a different effect, such as giving you a primary stat bonus whenever you run into a glowy orb that spawns, or gaining a 50% boost to the duration of any food or flask that you consume. At this point, I've already crafted a bunch of bracers to show and test all 8 of the enhancements on offer, and will give some insight and opinions of each one. Do keep in mind you can use these on any rare armors that you craft currently. I feel like this video is gonna get flagged for illicit things because of the number of times the word enhancement is gonna show up in this dialogue, so I guess we'll find out. Starting with Alchemy's enhancements, we have Sustaining Armor Polish and Infusion Corpse Purification. Sustaining Armor Polish gives a simple 50% boost to the duration of your food and flask buffs, which is very handy and saves you some money on consumables. Unfortunately, you can't cheese it and just put the armor on, then eat your food buff and flask and then swap it out. You do lose the 50% bonus if you do that. Still, it's very nice to have a way to increase your food and flask duration, though I honestly wish this item included things like sharpening stones and weapon oils, because it is so annoying when you run a key and, oh, the key took 40 minutes and your oil is only up for an hour, so now you need to use another one because it'll fall off halfway through the next key. Sigh. Infusion Corpse Purification maybe doesn't work yet. It's supposed to make you gain increased resources from slain enemies by turning their corpses into a summation of reagents or whatever that means, but I ran around for 30-40 minutes killing things in both Bastion and Zereth Mortis, and it didn't seem to change any of the corpses visually, and I didn't really get any extra reagents at all. I barely got any in the first place. This might be useful for people if it eventually works when they're getting resources, especially with the rare progenitor resources, but we'll have to wait and see if this thing actually does anything, I guess. Next, we'll look at the 2 Enchanting enhancements. Cosmic Protoweave gives you a boost to your Avoidance tertiary stat, and when you take damage, you have a chance to be healed. The heal is a pretty meek 1,367 damage on my character, and it doesn't seem to be affected by stamina or primary stat at all. This is a pretty minuscule amount of free healing, and the proc rate was not very impressive either. To test this, I let my character get slapped around for a few minutes. It was like 2.5 minutes in Zereth Mortis, basically until I was about to die, and I did this a few times, and the amount it healed was only like 8,000 to 9,000 damage in total, with one of the critical hits from a heal, so really it was only 4 procs at all in like 2.5 minutes. Very underwhelming, and the avoidance stat isn't a huge amount, but on bracers it was like 47, so on a larger stat budget piece it'd probably be closer to like 57, 60-ish. This is roughly like 3.5 to 4.5% gain to avoidance, which is not a bad thing at all, because that's less damage taken from AoE effects, but the heal of this enhancement is pretty underwhelming at this point. Magically Regulated Automacore is our first damage-oriented effect. Your abilities have a chance to spawn an unstable Automacore, which is this floaty, glowy, angry pinecone looking thing. After 4 seconds it'll explode, dealing damage to nearby enemies and healing nearby allies. It doesn't seem to have a target cap from the limited testing I could manage, which is pretty cool, but it has a pretty long timer before detonating, meaning it's likely for things to be moved away from it while it's getting ready to blow up. There's also the fact these spiky pine cones do the same amount of damage as a boomkin outside of their cooldown window, which is, to say, not very much at all. They hit for about 480 damage to an enemy, and the proc rate is fairly unimpressive, even when I'm just sitting on target dummies spamming moves every GCD. I mean, it wasn't too bad, but in like a 5-minute pull in AoE, it was like less than 1% of my damage. Overall, not really all that great in its current tuning. Now onto engineering, my most favorite profession ever that will totally get the worst possible options you can think of, most likely. Pure Air Sail extensions give you a speed tertiary stat boost. On bracers, it was a 7% movement speed, which is 70 speed. Also, your mounted movement speed is increased by 10%. Honestly, not a bad thing since movement speed is always good, especially if you're a slower class. The 10% mounted speed boost does not stack with Death Knight or Paladin speed boosts, and I don't think it stacks with any of the old enchants that you could use from like older expansions, just as a heads up. We also have the Erratic Genesis Matrix. This is meant to be a tank-oriented power, as it relies on taking damage to proc. Basically, every time you're hit, you gain a stack of the Genesis Matrix. At 5 stacks, you'll bazap whatever last enemy hits you. This doesn't seem to have an internal cooldown currently, so if you pull a big pack of enemies, the Matrix will proc really quickly. This makes the effect pretty good for free extra damage if you don't have any priority target that you're interested in killing, and in AoE, every hit counts and there doesn't seem to be an internal cooldown on it, so you can literally get hit 5 times within one GCD basically, and it will proc immediately. In single target, this effect obviously occurs a lot less often since only one thing's hitting you, but I can likely see some appeal to this effect in Mythic Plus if you aren't having to kite enemies all the time. Unfortunately, that's basically the name of the game in higher Mythic Plus keys, so this will be something that probably sees more effective usage in lower Mythic Plus when you don't have to kite as often. Lastly, we have Jewelcrafting Enhancements. The Devourer's Essence Stone gives a secondary stat buff whenever you kill an enemy, and the tooltip is very misleading and frankly wrong. The secondary stat chosen is always your highest stat, and despite saying that it stacks 10 times, it actually only stacks 5 times. The buff lasts for 20 seconds and gives 53 secondary stat per stack. This buff also refreshes whenever you kill anything, so basically it's around 265 of your best stat as long as you're constantly killing enemies, such as in Mythic Plus, open world content, Torghast, or any raid encounter with a lot of ads. Yeah, it's pretty freaking good. The tooltip on this buff says it gives haste, but it definitely procs my highest secondary stat, which is versatility. This one is pretty fantastic and is most likely the go-to option for Mythic Plus in its current state. Lastly, we have the Ephemera Harmonizing Stone. This effect causes any abilities you use to have a chance to spawn a glowy yellow orb nearby. If you run into the orb, you'll gain 41 of your primary stat for 15 seconds. The proc rate on these orbs is a bit inconsistent, because there are times I'd get 2 orbs within like 10 seconds of each other, causing the buff to overwrite itself and refresh, and then other times where I'd go like a minute before seeing another one show up. My testing is by no means conclusive of the overall uptime and effectiveness of this, but in 5 minutes I only had about 15% uptime of the buff at any given time I tried this. This buff doesn't sound incredibly OP strong or anything, and it's definitely a noteworthy gain, so it probably won't get touched very much in tuning. And primary stat is much more valuable in Shadowlands than compared to other expansions, so it's not a bad proc to get, especially on a smaller stat piece like bracers. As a bit of a recap and to go over the ones I think are the most useful, of all the buffs that increase your throughput or damage, the Jewelcrafter's Devourer Essence Stone is the clear winner right now in any scenarios where you can kill a consistent amount of enemies. This could include some raid encounters, but mainly things like Mythic Plus, Torghast, or open world content are where it'll perform the best. Having up to 265 of your best secondary stat is quite exceptional, and for 20 seconds too at that. I imagine this will be tuned down quite a bit before it hits live service to bring it more in line with the other effects though. On the other hand, the Ephemera Harmonizing Stone is looking about what I'd expect one of these enhancements to perform like, as it is a noticeable gain without being something with a huge uptime and large stat gain like the Devourer Essence. The Engineering Erratic Genesis Matrix can do a pretty solid amount of free damage as a tank, however in higher keys, much more of time is spent kiting around instead of actually getting beat up, so the performance likely won't be as impactful in more advanced content, as well as not being all that great in low target situations, or when you can't choose which target takes the hit and you have a priority target that you want to take extra damage anyhow. The remaining enhancements all have quality of life or niche usages, or are just frankly not tuned enough or impressive enough to begin with, so I can only really see the Jewelcrafting ones and maybe the Engineering Genesis Matrix thing being a worthy choice to consider wearing one of these new crafted pieces of gear, especially since you can easily just craft a pair of bracers or a cloak or something with a low stat budget, so you aren't really taking a hit on the item level loss, and you're still gaining a throughput because of the effectiveness of the buff. Anyways folks, I hope this first look at these new crafting reagents was interesting, informative, helpful, or maybe some combination of the three. I saw these a while ago and never got around to testing them, and I'm frankly glad I did now, because I can totally see some of these being really useful and not something people would notice or catch on to for quite a while. If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like or maybe commenting about which enhancement seems the most interesting to you. As always, my appreciation and gratitude to all of my viewers and especially my patrons, who all help make these Shiba Shenanigans possible. Thank you all so much for watching. This is the Red Rogue, and I'll see you guys around.